Welcome to the Compliance Resource Center How to Set Up Your Site series. In this presentation, we're going to review site navigation and structure. First, we will introduce you to some common SharePoint conventions. Then we will go over user roles and permissions and appointing those permissions. Finally, we'll explain the Excel workbook that we use to assign user permissions. Let's start with some SharePoint language. A list. What is a list? Have you used Excel, Access, or Word? You've probably worked with worksheets and tables. When you work with Excel, you use columns to organize and manage items. SharePoint lists are very similar to Excel. If you look at the Excel table and SharePoint list pictured on this slide, you will notice that they have the exact same information organized in the same way. Each task is a row, and the columns have information that identify the task. So what's the difference? The list is web-based. So what are the advantages to using a SharePoint list? As I said, it's web-based. Anyone who has permissions can access it through any browser. A list has the ability to be used in other lists and libraries. There is versioning. Lists have the ability to include content, and the list can also require content approval before an item is visible on the list. So those are some of the benefits of using a list instead of using Excel. What is a list made of? A list is made of columns. If you create a new column and you are providing additional information that identifies the item in the list, each column is referred to as metadata. What's a library? A library is essentially another form of a list. So what's different? The content associated with the list determines if it is a list or if it is a library. Lists are more data-focused, while libraries are more document-focused. Items. A list can be thought of as a collection of pieces of information, all of which typically have the same properties. These pieces of information are items. When you want to add something to a list, you are adding an item. When you add a new item, a box appears where you need to enter the properties of an item. If there's an asterisk next to the property, information must be added here. So if there's a must fill field that is not relevant, you can always enter something like NA, or we administrators have the ability to take away the requirement to put information into that field. So now we'll go into the Compliance Resource Center and take a look at all this. So once you go to the site and log in, you should click on your organization's member site, and let's go into policy documents, the policy document list. And each one of these rows is an item, and each one of these columns is metadata, or the information in the field that it wants you to add. So if we were to add a new policy, we go up here, go to items, a new item. All of these little asterisks say that they require information. Let's say that we don't think that we need a description. So for any of the policies that we have, that we don't want to make that a requirement, what we would do, let's go to Lists under List Tools, go to list settings, and here each column is one of those fields in that box that it wants you to fill out. So in description right here, click that, and you'll see right here it says require that this column contains information. We'll say no. We'll say OK. Now when we go back to the policy document list, and if we add a new item, you'll see that description is no longer required. So back to the presentation. Sorry about that. Views. Views are the visual representations of SharePoint data. It's the way we want a user to initially view the list. Views are created by displaying the columns in a specified order. So you can change the views to sort and to filter, but I think it'd be better to show you again on the site. So if you want to change your view, you're going to click this list button right here, and you can say modify view. And right here, you'll see that this is the order, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that these columns are showing up in. So the first thing people see is the next review date, then is it an attachment, then the title. Well, what if we wanted the title to be the first thing that they saw? All we would do is change this position from left drop-down menu to 1. And it just moved everything over that was to the left of it to the right by 1. So you can have the items automatically sorted. We could say in ascending number by the status. So that way the status one is if it's current or inactive. So that way the current ones would be first. And we'll say OK. So now you'll see the policy is the first column that shows up, whereas before it was the next review date. And we're only going to be seeing the current policies over here because we've sorted it for current and then inactive. So at the very end of the list, you'd see the inactive ones. Let's go back here. So, surveys. They're another great feature of SharePoint. We on the CRC are using surveys for internal audits. The advantages of using SharePoint for audits is that it's completed by anyone, anywhere who has a web browser, even on mobile devices. The responses can be named or anonymous. These are real-time audits, and you can use the audit with really great analysis tools that are available. Let's go over who will be using your agency's Compliance Resource Center and what they will be doing. Not all lists and libraries are relevant to all employees. SharePoint gives you the ability to limit access to lists and libraries. You also have the ability to grant different levels of permissions within individual lists and libraries. The organization should designate 1 or 2 site administrators who can access all lists and libraries with the highest level of permissions. The site administrator will have the ability to alter any user's permissions when necessary. Within each list and library, you create groups of users based on permissions. The permissions determine how a group of users can interact with the items in a list or library. The permission groups are users can view only, users view and add content, users can view, add, and edit content, and finally, users can view, add, edit content, and modify formats. A CAL, or Client Access License, is a license that gives a user the right to access the services of the server. A CAL is purchased for every user who accesses the server. When you assign permissions to a user, you're actually assigning permissions to that person's CAL. CAL is like a login. Guest CALs are great because purchasing CALs for every member of your organization is not necessary. A guest CAL can be used by any member of your organization who has the username and password for that guest CAL. The guest CAL is set up to have view-only permissions in the following lists: the org chart, policy documents, and compliance activities. Your organization will need to decide who needs access to your Compliance Resource Center site and document that on the Excel workbook, which is also a blank one is provided in the resources section of this course. In the workbook, each list and library will have a tab. In each permission group column, the names of the individuals you want to have in that permission group. So, if we go over to our Excel book, you'll see our policy permission groups. So the V right here, members who have view-only access to the policy documents, would just be our default CAL. So any employee who knows the default CAL, which we do have published for employees to see, could log on and view any policy. Next, Group A, for members who may view and add content to the policy document. These are generally people who have a lot of interaction with the policies, but don't have the final say when they're being reviewed and created. Members who may view, add, and edit, edit content to the policy document. These people generally have approval abilities, because you really don't want anyone to be able to just go into your policy documents and change things. Group F, members who may view, add, edit, and content and modify formats. So generally these are people who are going to be your site administrators. Group A1, members from this group are a Tier 1 approver group. And 2 and 3 means that they are approvers on Tier 2 and approvers on Tier 3. So there are tabs for each one of the lists and libraries, and you're going to need to go through and decide which people in your organization fall into which permission group. So this concludes our presentation on the Compliance Resource Center site navigation and structure. Thank you very much.